So I'm Meg Chandler, I'm the Director of the New Schools Network. Thank you all so much for coming today. It's wonderful to see so many people here to discuss basically our launch panel for our report into AP free schools, but it's happening at a really important time in education because the school's white paper has just been published. The consultation on the SEND changes closed yesterday, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to welcome a really impressive panel today. We've got Nick Brindle, who's the CEO of the Yes Trust. We've got Lord Mike Storey, who's a Liberal Democrat peer, former head teacher, former City Council leader. We've got Dennis Sims from the Youth Endowment Fund, who is also a former AP head. And we've got the Shadow Secretary of State, Laura Trott, here today. And I just want to do a quick scene setting before we hear from the panel about their thoughts. So I think most people here understand the importance that alternative provision plays in the education sector. It looks after some of the most vulnerable pupils, but it still doesn't have national standards, it doesn't have consistent accountability or reliable data, and outcomes do remain very variable. At the same time, demand is rising rapidly. Our report showed that in the last 3 years, demand for AP has increased for over 30%. But at the same time, state-funded AP, only about 30 to 40% of children are actually placed in state-funded AP. Now, this report came out at a time when 20 local authorities were considering whether or not to proceed with AP free schools, and sadly 11 of those decided not to. So at a time when AP, the demand for it is rising and state provision is low, we're still not seeing that investment in specialist provision. But there's also been a shift in policy. So the white paper was very clear that the government now wants to see inclusion in mainstream schools through inclusion bases, multi-agency support and earlier intervention. AP is positioned in that white paper as a support to mainstream rather than a destination in itself. And whilst I'm sure many people would welcome this move to inclusion within the system, we need to actually unpack what that means for both mainstream provision and alternative provision, as well as special educational needs. And it's that right balance between inclusion in mainstream and high quality specialist AP. So how do we ensure that we get quality, accountability, and most importantly, strong outcomes for pupils? That's where this panel is going to come in today. And I'm going to turn and just to give them a short opening reflection and respond to some of the report's recommendations. And I'd like to first speak to Nick, who, as I mentioned, is the CEO of the Youth Engagement Trust, which is an AP and special school multi-academy trust covering 9 local authorities across 3 regional areas. He's a RISE advisor for the North West, and in his spare time, which I'm sure there's lots of, he's completing a doctorate in strategic leadership in education settings.
That's the one.
That's the one. Nick.
Yeah, so the reflections on the white paper and then sort of the standpoint from NSN. So the white paper, I think, sets out a reform agenda that is generally, you can't disagree with. You know, we're heading for a system that doesn't support anybody well. And there's the whole adage of jack of all trades, master of none. But that's where I feel that it's flawed as well. Because for the last 8 years or so of supporting with a few of the colleagues in this room, we've always harped on and really tried to emphasise a continuum of education and making sure that each child has the right support when they actually need it and they can move both up and down. The sector, I would say, is actually quite worried, AP and SEND, because even though those statistics Meg's just said there, I'm working with lots of different schools that have seen systematic defunding. I mean, literally, my trust was told 2 months before it's happening, we're going to be short £500,000 in one of our schools because the local authority needs to save money, just like that. And some of the pushback we've had is experts at hand. Okay, yeah, all for upstream work, and I think we can help a lot more by doing that. We're not going to be around to do it if there isn't actually a real strategic plan on actually how that continuum works. But the sector is worried because it actually feels more marginalised and sort of, well, you're there doing your thing, we're pushing it all upstream. And there's a worry there because it's going to take away from the focus of really, really high quality intervention and support work for kids and schools doing what we do really, really well, and focused into more survivability, having to move away from moral purpose of a school and things like that. So I think it's a nice precedence to set out, but it's nowhere near as specific as it needs to be with how AP plays a vital role in a continuum of education rather than a supportive arm. So that's my view on the white paper. In terms of NSN, I mean, I'm a big believer in free schools. I've got 5 of them. But what I think is tremendous about the free school movement, not from a biased position at all, is the ability to innovate incredibly quickly, and something that we've been able to do rapidly, which I'll give a little bit of outcome data for you. But we're doing conversions as well, where we take on special measures schools. They can take 5 to 10 years to turn around because it is so deep-seated. And yes, are children better off because we're doing that? Absolutely. However, from day dot opening a school and setting out a precedence, I do believe that standards should be brought into the sector. I think it would improve the sector, but not if we were to go above and beyond and standardise what AP is, because that would take away from the nuance of the continuum I'm talking about. But by being able to innovate, we've had 2 children that are NEET in 10 years from our main AP. Wow. That's it. And we track that for 3 years. If any child joins us in year 10, they will get a minimum of 5 GCSEs, including English and Maths. But actually, that will be children also studying triple science, all the way through to a massive plethora of vocational qualifications as well. And you offer multiple pathways to really be able to support the children. Very, very proud that 19 children have got full university degrees, 6 of which are now teachers, which is mind-boggling because I'm sure I put them off. But that only came because of the precedence we set from opening the doors of a new school with a new sort of priority of how we push. So that's incredibly hard to do with what is already existing in the sector, because it's already got a PRU, a view, and it's already used for very, very high level. And to shift in 2 years to a preventative model from a very reactive one currently, I personally think is quite a challenge. And to do that is going to be, we're going to have to be far more specific on the roles and responsibilities of every stakeholder in order to make that happen. Is that enough?
That's really, really interesting. I think there's lots to pick up there, but if we continue on just thinking about the role that AP plays as almost a place where if mainstream isn't currently working, children can go to AP to have a positive educational experience. Lord Storey, I was wondering if you had any kind of reflections from your experience both in education and your experience in policy and politics about how maybe we could improve that as a journey for young people.
Can I say, first of all, that reading the biog of me, I was a little bit concerned. Ex-head teacher, ex-leader of Liverpool City Council, ex-education spokesperson in the Lords. I much prefer the word former, but actually I am now our deputy leader in the House of Lords, so I'm not an ex in something.
Brilliant.
So I feel quite good about that.
Promotion.
One of the real joys of being in the House of Lords is that you are able to talk to people from all different expertise. And when I was education spokesperson, I quickly realised that my recent relevant experience of a teacher, a head teacher, was fast diminishing. So I decided that, and I still do this, to go and visit a whole cross-section of educational establishments on a regular basis. In fact, last week I went to a university technical college, I went to a studio school, I was on a week off, and I went to, I'm told, the only all-through school from nursery to primary, they call it prep, because it was an independent school beforehand, to the main school. It was Liverpool College, which was an independent school, has now become an academy. So those were my 3 visits last week. And a few months ago, I went to an alternative provider who is registered, and that was a progress school, and was really, really impressed at what I saw, impressed talking to the young people as well. I got, one of the luxuries of being in the House of Lords is that you suddenly pick up issues and you think, this can't be right, this is just wrong. And I was on the platform at Runcorn Station, and a former Labour MP, who I knew really well, I said, how are you, George? He said, I'm fine. I said, everything all right? He said, well, I'm fed up with my council at the moment. He said, you know, the paying for these so-called naughty kids to go to these places to take troublemakers out of school. And I said, what are you talking about? And of course, he was talking about pupils who had been either permanently excluded from schools, or in some cases suggested they move out of school. And they weren't going into registered provision, they were going into unregistered provision. And I just thought this was totally and utterly wrong. I mean, those children, those young people, were often in the main had special education needs, often they had dysfunctional families, often they came from poor circumstances. And what they needed more than anything was stability in their lives. What they needed more than anything was somebody to give them a hug. What they needed most of all was to know that we weren't going to give up on them. And that became my interest in alternative education, along with a whole host of other things. So I have particular thoughts about it, and perhaps I'll shut up now and come back to that in a moment.
That's really helpful. Thanks so much, Mike. And of course, former bringing all of the expertise you have into them is much better than X. I 100% agree. And it was probably only the kind of Twitter kind of number count of letters that I had that I went for the former rather than the latter. So apologies for that. But that's really interesting. And I think one of the things that does exist within AP as well is, and I think all schools, is a huge variation in what people are able to achieve and not able to achieve. And again, with the work that we did around the free schools, what we saw was there were some consistent threads to what good within AP looked like. They still had the space for innovation, as Nick was talking about, but there were some consistent threads, and which brings me beautifully on to Dennis, who did a lot of work with the CSJ actually as part of the integrated work, where he helped to develop the Quality AP toolkit to try and bring together actually what does Quality AP look like to help leaders do that. Dennis, can we move on to you next and have your thoughts?
Sure, thank you. Good to see you all today. I think one of the things to start off by saying is that the system that we've got currently isn't here by design. It's kind of emerged out of a series of needs in different areas and different range of resources that are available to different local authorities, different schools, some really passionate and pioneering leaders who have seen a need and decided to do something about it. I think if we were to take a step back and we think about new policy, it shouldn't just be about tweaking at the edges and trying to kind of just round the corners of some of the sharper edges that are problematic. And think about funding, the availability of accurate data to support our understanding of practice. There are so many fundamental things that just aren't right. And yeah, I used to work here and started to ask questions about, to government departments about how many children are in AP. It's difficult to obtain that number. How many AP settings are there? Well, it depends on the types of settings we're thinking about. These are just basic things that we need to get a handle on and have much better grip on in order to be able to understand actually what's happening. And then also the funding landscape. It's not fair, depending on where you are as a child and depending on the access to provision, it vastly impacts on your experience. And the AP workforce is an incredible thing. I'm going to say that as a biased former AP leader. But of course, there's fantastic people doing great work, working hard, being innovative and being creative, but the system isn't created in a way that is structured to enable them to thrive as professionals. It's often reliant on kind of your moral imperative, to your point, Nick, around we're going to have to make the right decision, even though there are some perhaps adverse, perverse incentives that are going to be, we're going to be, taking one step back as an organisation in order to do the right thing for a young person, which should never be the case. And I think that filters down through to the experience of children, and particularly on this idea of the continuum of where young people can move across different types of provision. The system should allow for that and not penalise settings through funding mechanisms because they're no longer educating that child long term. I think the data is an easy one. It's not that difficult. We're not talking about that many children, and it's easy to get a better grip on what's really happening. But also just the provision and where children are is a really important aspect as well. And we are talking about some of our most vulnerable young people in society. I work at the YAF now, focused on violence prevention, and there's so many clear statistics about children who are excluded, children who are persistently suspended, and the heightened risk of involvement in violence. And it's therefore crucial that we get it right for these young people, and that's why I think a blueprint of a system rather than a tweaking of the edges is what's really needed.
That's really interesting, and I think one of the things that, again, our report hoped for was that actually that might be what the white paper provided? Like, what is the distinct role of alternative provision within the wider education system, and how do they work together? And actually, you know, having responded to the consultation which ended yesterday, and I'm sure many of you in the audience also responded to that consultation, it was interesting that, you know, AP, it was within one question. Like, of the whole consultation, it was one question, and it was describing AP as a very specific provision, as a kind of temporary provision, rather than actually reflecting the wider good and the wider need for it in the system. Because, as you say, the system has developed rather than was planned. Which brings us on to the Shadow Education Secretary, Laura Trott, who, I mean, do you think that a planned AP system would be the right way forward?
Absolutely. And Meg, I'm so happy that NSN are championing this and you've brought us here together today, because I think in a school system, which is generally working pretty well, this is the bit where some excellent pockets of provision aside, we do need to do more work and we do need to do more thinking. And it was disappointing that AP wasn't a key part of the school's white paper, because I think, I mean, to Dennis's point, this isn't a system that has been thought through, designed in the interests of children. So that needs to change. Because I think we just have to start with the statement, which I believe is true, I'm interested if anyone disagrees here, is mainstream isn't for everyone. I heard AP called intensive care for certain young people, and that is what I think, done well, it absolutely is. It takes children who can't have, you know, the 6-on-1 support that is available in certain APs in the mainstream sector. Whilst, of course, we should have inclusive spaces, I think the inclusion hubs are very important, there are some children for which the need for AP will always be present, so we need to make sure that AP is as high quality as it can possibly be. And I think when we talk about exclusions, there is also a feeling, I think too often, that exclusions are done as a casual reflex by some schools, and that they're easy to do. And anyone that's ever spoken to a head teacher who has excluded a pupil will know that there are so many barriers, rightly, that you have to go through to exclude a pupil. But is it important that when we do exclude that pupil, that they go to somewhere which is high quality, which, as Nick says, gives them something where they can see a path back, where they can see a part of their future, where they go on and they become teachers, where they go on and they go to universities. We should have high aspirations for children in AP settings. And it is important also that schools know that that is where pupils are going to go if they leave. Because we also have to think about the other 29 children in a classroom. We've seen the problems created in certain state schools where children haven't been excluded. The most extreme example is Harvey Wilgoose, who brought an axe to school and wasn't excluded, and then went on to murder another pupil with a knife. And if you go to APs, which I have, that work with children who are subject to extreme violence, who are carrying knives with them, this is the specialist support that they need that is just not available in mainstream. So I wholeheartedly support the thrust of what NSN is bringing forward. I think that it has a potential to really change things, because if you look at the problems that are inherent in our society, so much of them come from children who are in alternative provision, and also children in care, which is something that we should have a much greater discussion about as a society and in policy making than we do at the moment. But we've got to get AP right. And I think this was, frankly, a bit that wasn't given enough attention. When we had the schools revolution, it has done so much good, but those principles are not there in AP. Other than, I think, the free schools, which, as Nick has outlined, have worked so well and have been such a beacon within this system, supporting some already great practice. But we do need more oversight of it. It is ridiculous that children who are so vulnerable are in unregistered provision. It is unacceptable, it needs to stop. But what we need to do is build up the standards within the space. And so I think the recommendations that are in your piece along that lines are very important. We do need better data, we do need better innovation in the system, and we do frankly just need every local authority to have one of these. It is just insane that there is not an AP in every local authority. I don't know how we have got to the situation where that is not the case. So things do need to change, but I'm really glad that we're having this discussion today and that so many people are here and care about this, because we can make a difference, I think, to this sector. Because as Dennis said, it's not a huge number of pupils, right? This is small, we can do this. And so with discussion like today, I think we can.
Well, that's really helpful. Thank you. I mean, there's so much from what people have said here to pick up. I mean, the one reflection I would just make is in trying to work out how many children were in AP to put into the report, then the kind of cross-references of the different data sets were, needed as statistics degree, which I'm afraid I don't have. So, I did my best. But I think that there's one of the themes that have come up, I think, which is the report looks at what good specialist provision looks like as a standalone free school. The move for the white paper is towards these inclusion hubs. Can I get maybe the panel's reflections on, is the government right to prioritise these exclusion hubs at the expense of the AP free schools? Because ultimately, when the free schools pipeline came up for decision, that was the decision they were given. They had the decision about whether to proceed with the free school or to use that investment to invest in mainstream provision elsewhere. So I'd be really interested in the panel's reflections about that investment decision. And sorry to go to Nick again first, but as a trust that had some of those free schools in the pipeline and didn't go that way, it'd be useful to get your reflection.
Awful decision. Yes, we had two free schools. Something I'd been working on personally for 10 years in what I refer to as our home local authority to remove a postcode lottery where one of my free schools supports the north of the borough incredibly effectively, and there's nothing in the south, and the south being Crewe. For anybody that knows Crewe, not a great place. And deserved better. They decided not to go with that. And the other one's Stoke, who don't have any type of AP and are only, believe it or not, their permanent exclusions are one of the only places in the country where it's not persistent disruption. It's armed violence as the number one reason for PermEx. Both decided to take the money. Unfortunately, I suppose an oxymoron would be they both approached me a week later saying, actually, we really need some AP, and have since tried to contact the DfE about establishing AP with the department sort of saying you can't have your cake and eat it, unfortunately. So long story cut short, I think it's quite short-sighted to not want to develop that. The reason being, as already been quite openly said, if we continue to do everything the same, mainstream is not right for everybody. And the adage of hospital, Emma there will know what I'm about to say here. We always used APs like the A&E of the NHS. Yeah. It's as simple as that. We've got everything, but we're there for immediate diagnostics, really, really triage and get everything going. You've got the hospital wings that all work. You've got the ICU, which is your specialist provision, in your mainstay wards, which is your mainstream. Imagine shutting A&E in a hospital. What would happen then? And so I think it's short-sighted, but I also feel for the local authorities because they are under huge time pressure to show massive drops in high-need spending because that isn't sustainable. In order to get the 90% rise-off and actually try and put themselves on a level footing. So they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. So I understand the rationale behind the decision. I just think it's particularly short-sighted, given that if inclusive mainstream does not work as anticipated, the tsunami of need that's going to hit schools, we won't have the infrastructure to deal with it, and that was worrying.
That is worrying. And Dennis, from your work with the AP Quality Toolkit, what do you think schools that are now investing in a new inclusion base, or perhaps changing the sign on the door from a resource base to an inclusion base instead, need to be doing to ensure that they are being able to meet the needs of the children that will be there?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. We're talking about the same money that's being put into different places, and sometimes the same staff. Because if I was leading a school that's going to set up an inclusion base, I'm going to think of how can I get the right staff to support that. I'm going to probably need to poach some staff from the AP sector to make that run really, really well. So it's just a weird circle effect there. I guess it comes down to the right curriculum first and foremost, that's tailored to young people's needs, delivered by high quality, high trained, hardworking, caring professionals. They're two fundamentals, and we see in the AP sector, when you get that right, it really does work, when it's well-resourced and well-funded. Too often, schools currently, whether it's through a specific new policy or just out of need, are trying to do their best in a corner of the school, in a few classrooms at the end of the corridor, with a few teachers who are under timetable, and calling it AP. That's not AP. It's a cheap way of keeping children in school, avoiding the risk of exclusion sometimes and preventing those children from going off to potentially even poorer provision if there isn't any good quality available locally. So it's not an easy answer. I'd obviously point people to the AP Quality Toolkit, which has got a range of different things to think about, but it is a nuanced picture. It's not just a do mainstream light. That doesn't work. Otherwise, those children would already be thriving in a mainstream setting.
So one of the things that the Youth Endowment Fund evaluated, and in fact, I know that St Wilfrid's, who's mentioned in the report, and we've got some representatives at the back from St Wilfrid's, they put in place and they piloted the APST, which is the, I'm going to get this wrong, AP Specialist Team?
Safe Task Force.
Sorry. And do you think that the idea of expert at hands and that kind of universal provision is the natural kind of next step to kind of say, that worked in terms of intensive support in an AP setting, let's move that to the mainstream? And do you think there is a danger there that might come through about those resources being stretched too far, given the fact that an AP school is often much smaller than a mainstream?
Yeah, for those who aren't familiar, the AP Safe Task Force looked at putting a range of professionals that would support young people into AP settings. So think about youth workers, social workers, youth justice workers, mentors, you name it, mental health support, all the types of wraparound support that a young person might need into AP settings to provide that additional support. What we found through that work is that attendance is often something that is improved, not just attendance to the appointments and the sessions and the work that's being carried out with those professionals, but actually attendance to school. And it's no surprise, right, that we give children everything they need and don't just expect them to, perform in a lesson and they can thrive. It does cost money, right? Getting those experts in and around children is costly, but we've often found that the attendance and the kind of hit rate, how often those professionals are able to see young people, is higher because they're almost a captive audience that are there present. So there's definitely a model where, those professionals that are trying to have a positive impact on young people can access them through school. But it does rely on them attending school. And that only works if that first part is in place, and that needs to be because it's an inclusive, welcoming place where young people feel a sense of belonging.
Well, I want to open this up to questions, but whilst I do and give you a moment to think about your fantastic questions that you will ask, I just want to bring the politicians on the panel back in. And, we've heard a lot about the practice, we've heard a lot about the evidence. I kind of think that, we've just had the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill where there was legislative ability to make change. If you, in the next 12 months, could make a change to improve this practice, improve the quality of provision that is available to some of these most vulnerable people, what would you do? Laura, can I go to you first?
Yeah, we put down a number of amendments to the schools bill literally on this topic, right? And we have tried to kind of push the idea. My first conference speech was, a large part of it was about AP, because, as I said, I believe very, very strongly that this is a system where there is some amazing practice, but it is too varied, it's patchy, and the quality is not good enough across the board. And so I feel very strongly that we should have it in every local authority. It needs to be very clearly set out in every local authority. I think actually we should have separate provision for girls and boys, because actually girls, if you look at the, actually Dennis has probably got some stats on this, but like the attendance of girls to APs is actually particularly low because it does tend to be boys and they drop out of the system, and that is a really big issue. They all need to be inspected by Ofsted. I do think actually that academy change should also have an AP attached to them. I think that would be helpful because I think it ties in the performance of the chain also to the children who are excluded and keep them within the system. So yeah, a lot to be done. And I think that this is an area where we should be debating policy properly and having thoughtful ideas about what to do next based on evidence. But it's just not happening at the moment. And that's why I thought the school's white paper was disappointing on that front.
Thank you. Lord Storey?
How long have you got? Well, first of all, I agree with Laura that mainstream schools are not necessarily for every pupil. I think we have to think of the pupil first and not the school. And when we talk about alternative provision, of course, it's an umbrella term because it involves other types of setting, hospital schools, for example, forest schools. The most important thing for any child, whether in a mainstream school or in alternative provision, is the quality of the teacher. how good that teacher is, how well trained that teacher is, how much that teacher is able to teach, motivate, inspire those young people. And I think as a society, we've gone backwards in terms of the quality of teaching. The second thing is inspection. Yes, we have to inspect schools, but it is absolutely appalling that only, is it 1% of school inspectors have any experience of alternative provision? That's absolutely mad. You couldn't make it up. It's equally mad that in terms of the Ofsted inspection, they use the same handbook to judge an alternative provider as they would for Eton. Well, that can't be right either, can it? So we have to be sympathetic to every individual setting of children, and we have to sort of not have the view that everything has to be done this way. It clearly doesn't. Our job as teachers, our job as educationalists is to absolutely provide the best for our children. I always think that it's teachers have a right to teach, but pupils also have a right to learn. And that is always stuck in my mind, that is the way that we should, that is almost like the lodestone of how we should be dealing with this issue of alternative providers. I just want to pick up on something that Laura said at the beginning, and it really is quite worrying, really, isn't it? We seem to put our young children all the time in unregistered providers. Never mind schools. In the care system, the number of children, we're talking about little children here sometimes, in unregistered provision is an absolute national disgrace. And we need to do something about that quickly. As I say, I could go on, but I'll move on.
Thank you so much. I'd love to take questions. We've covered a lot in that debate from well, everything. So can I first go to Sarah? If you could introduce yourself and then ask a question.
Sure. My name is...
Yep.
Yeah.
My name is Sarah Johnson. I'm the president, which sounds very posh, of the national organisation PRUSA, which represents pupil referral units and alternative provision, but only registered ones. So just to clarify that. I was really pleased that you mentioned hospital education. If our colleague Kath Kitchen was here from the National Association for Hospital Education, she would be talking about that. I wondered about the role of the new school network for children who have medical needs and find it really difficult to attend school. They might be emotional-based school non-attenders. They might be children with quite significant psychiatric issues, discharged from inpatient services, for example, or they could be children with physical health needs. So I wondered about the new school network's view on that.
Gosh, I didn't expect to take questions, but bring them on. The difficulty that we've got at the moment is actually the means of opening free schools is much diminished. So the government has been clear there's going to be no central drives of free schools. We saw from the free school pipeline review something that I actually found quite shocking, because the government announced they were going to do a mainstream review of 44 schools, and actually what came out was throwing all of the SEND and AP schools that were in the pipeline up in the air at the same time. And it's clear that they've used that as an opportunity to tilt back towards, to do this policy shift into mainstream provision, which, look, everybody can take a different view, that's fine, you justify your view. And I think the difficulty for me was, in the white paper, as has been mentioned, is there wasn't any time, there wasn't any space, there wasn't any theory put there about what actually AP should be doing for long-term care. Hospital schools, I must admit, I didn't read the white paper for hospital schools, but I'm not sure how much. Actually, schools which aren't mainstream schools were given much space to expound what they should be doing within the system. I think from where the New Schools Network position is, we would like to see new free schools. We think that there is a power, as Nick said, in being able to open up a school and from day one say, this is what we're going to be. We've got some fantastic example of practitioners and head teachers in the room who have done that, who have had a vision about what they have wanted to achieve and have used the Free Schools programme in order to provide that. And the people that benefit are the kids. You know, this is not about making teachers feel better or leaders feeling better. It's about providing a better experience for the children, which is ultimately what we're here for. So what the New Schools Network wants to see is a commitment from the government for more free schools, especially innovative free schools that want to try and do things differently, because, you know, more of the same here, especially in this setting, is not going to work. We need to change up, and we need to be supporting the professionals to use the evidence that's there, to develop the evidence that's there, and to create that change that we need to see. I don't know if any of the other panels, now I get off my soapbox, I don't know if any of the other panellists would like to mention.
I think EBSNA is a massive hidden need that is just not really discussed. It definitely wasn't highlighted. It's too easy for local authorities to actually hide children in the sector at the moment. We as the APSG AP Reference Group have been sort of really trying to push is the area send inspection getting far tighter on finding these children, because I think there's a lot of hidden numbers there that will scare you, and they are generally the most vulnerable children in that local authority. At the moment, APs are set up to help that cohort. It's as simple as that. And we regularly do with local authorities that are forward-thinking and strategic and actually see the benefits of that. Where they're not, or they are struggling to stay afloat, they're not working to any long-term sort of, I think education should be cross-parliament really, in terms of not a bargaining chip, but actually something that spans a longitudinal period, where actually we're not arguing over should it be an exclusion or not an exclusion. It should be how does this child get the right support, because they don't have a home currently, and we need to make sure they're really looked after. And I think the sooner we lift that rock and actually start looking underneath to find out where all these children are, the quicker we can really good solutions to help. And that includes medical provision as well, because there's a lot of children there that are misunderstood. You've got everything from children that are sectioned in level 4 CAMS, the whole way through to children that have cancer or dialysis that are actually very able, and that's a wide range.
Yeah. Any more questions? We get Emma right next to you. Look at that.
Emma Bradshaw, CEO of Alternative Learning Trust, again a specialist trust for AP and SEND. Does the panel agree that we've got to get much more explicit and set out a clear vision for AP in every area? We've touched on it, talking about consistency, talking about data, where AP sits at the centre of that continuum. It does downstream work as the 3-tier model talked about on the chapter from the Green paper from the previous government and is built upon, that it does the upstream work and works for all of that sector. And if you based your experts at hand as a task force, particularly for the social, emotional, mental health children in any authority in the AP, they will be experts that can work downstream and upstream, but are actually able to work with the most vulnerable families, the most challenging families, the most risky families in the system. It's just
That's a big throw open there, Mike.
Yes. I mean, I was quite stunned a couple of years ago. I put an oral question down on alternative provision, and I would say probably 2/3 of the chamber were completely lost. They hadn't a clue what I was talking about. And in fact, some of them came to me afterwards and said, what is an alternative? So I think there is a real need to actually, if you like, I hate using the word, but I'm going to use it, manifesto for what alternative provision should be about. By the way, it should also be about the quality of the teacher in alternative provision. There has to be real expertise there as well. I mean, you almost can pluck figures out the air at the moment, because I was reading somewhere that there are 10,000 unregistered providers. That is surely an issue we need to sort out. But amongst those 10,000 unregistered providers, there'll be some brilliant providers. Yep. So how can we get them registered? And how can we make it work for them? By the way, some of those unregistered will be fundamental religious schools of various sorts. So it's a very difficult area to navigate, and I think we just need to make a start on it.
Laura, can I bring you in on this idea of a local plan? Obviously, local authorities right now are having to come up with their local send plans. And one of the things that I think I read in Schools Week, was that they were being disincentivised for increasing specialist provision within those local plans.
Yeah, that's obviously mad. I mean, I agreed with everything that Emma said. And I think it is really important when we think about experts at hand. When you think about the support that is available to a child, if you have, let's say, 2 quite violent, very troubled children at a secondary school, when Dennis was talking about all the support that is available at a really good AP, right? You've got your social workers there, you've got your youth support workers, you've got all the kind of wraparound that you'd really want to really help this child. With the best will in the world, that is not going to be available to the 6 or 7 secondary schools in the area. It's just not. But where it will be available is at the really good AP, and that is the whole point, right? When you are just diluting the support that is available to these individuals, there is a reason that you group them. It is so you can get that critical mass of wraparound care. And I really, truly believe that this is something that the government just haven't looked at enough. And I'm really pleased that actually cross-party, we have been trying to push them to do more, and we will continue to do so.
Nick, as someone that's had experience across local areas with different local authorities, I think one of the points that we pulled out in the report was actually AP in different local authorities can be like night and day, because you have an authority that is proactive, thinking about things, thinking about the preventative model, and almost just like your point about taking a school over, when you have an authority which is not like that and you're trying to kind of fight a rearguard action, it's a completely different kettle of fish. How do you think that local authorities are going to rise to the challenge that the government has put to them with these local SEND plans?
With difficulty? So I was speaking to Laura just before we started. The biggest drawback is the interim nature of leadership within local authorities. I think I dread to think the amount of directors of education or directors of children's services that I've had to work under within one local authority over a period of 10 plus years, because it just changes every 6 months, it feels like. That and that's not a rarity to one. That's working across so many local authorities. There is massive instability, and you could say, particularly in the education team, trusts becoming what they are. Money coming out of local authorities, they don't have the infrastructure, which is why I'm a little bit worried about LA trusts, and how do they have the same agility that trusts do. So that's a massive flaw, because that interim model that a lot of LAs pose, people don't make decisions, and therefore everything kind of just ends up going round in circles and nothing really gets done. And that's not what you really want to do with the vulnerability and the children that need the support now. Where local authorities are actually longitudinally looking at things, they can be very good. And what we find there is they not just AP, but with SEN, they bring leaders together to really co-create a force for reckoning, really, where you can see an agility between trusts, between local authorities, shared services, where actually, going back to continuum, the children get their needs met when they need it, which is really, really, taking a scalpel to a wound, not a shotgun. And from that reaps huge rewards. The difficulty there is those people leave, and too much of inclusion bases and things that, where we see it work really well upstream is down to one really quality member of staff with the expertise that drive a really high quality resource provision. That member of staff leaves or retires, it just crumbles down because there's not the breadth, and that's what needs looking at.
Can I go back to questions? Got Tabby at the back.
I'm Tabby Fitzgerald from the CSJ and the Education Policy team. Thank you so much for a really fascinating discussion. I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on the role of sport and enrichment in AP.
Ooh, right. Maybe we've just heard from you, Nick, but as a practitioner, how do you use sport across the Yes Trust?
Lots of different ways. I wouldn't just, if I could open it up and not just be sport, I think vocational education, I'm a design tech teacher and I specialise in construction, so very biased. But I have a thing around careers where, like, how do you become a porter in a hospital? In all honesty, how do you become a porter? I don't know that. Yet, actually, for some of my students that have ASD tendencies, they'll be able to work out efficient ways of getting around that hospital with a bed quicker than most people. And that would be a really, really good career for them. I don't know how to do that. But actually, if there's a career pathway there, there's definitely a vocational base that we can take to make that work. And that is the same with sport. Actually, physical activity, we know the health benefits of all of that. And actually, I've seen a drop in gang-related and criminal activity amongst some of our students when we've been able to involve them in team sports. And actually, sometimes their role model is a coach that actually just puts their arm around them and actually can, and they say, I don't personally like the language sense of belonging, but that authentic relationship where actually someone is gonna and put their neck out on the line to look after that child is what they need, and quite often that is found through sport. And keeps them away from other things where they're looking for that as well. So I think sport has a very vital place, but actually I think the wider vocational platform should definitely be looked at.
Dennis?
Yeah, there's so many benefits to sport, arts, creative passions and different opportunities. I recently visited a very good independent school. And it made me want to go back to school and go to that school because the provision of enrichment was like university. It was like there was societies for this, that and the other. And why not that for all children, right? So what can often happen is a child is taken out of mainstream and placed into AP. Sometimes that leads to a narrowing of curriculum, sometimes, not always. It also often leads to a lack of access to opportunities like after-school clubs and different team sports and different opportunities. So I think it's really, really important, not only just for the benefit of doing the activity, but as Nick has said, the trusted adult relationships that can come alongside it, whether that be a great sports coach or a mentor or just being part of something is really, really important. There's so many reasons why I'd be an advocate of it, but specifically after school. We know that violent crime peaks in weekdays between 4 and 6. Yeah. It's when children are leaving school and making their way home. So providing positive activities at that time is a specific activity that reduces the risk of children becoming involved in violence. And we know that our children in AP are at a heightened risk of involvement in violence. So there's just so many benefits and so many reasons to do it. Sometimes a challenge around funding and how much are we asking teachers to do. But yeah, that's definitely something that I'm a strong advocate for.
Yeah, and one of the AP schools that we looked at in the report, and I visited and spoke a lot to the principal there, is the Boxing Academy, and they use boxing as a way of engaging children who would otherwise not engage in education. And I think, again, to speak up for the free school model, kind of using that innovative approach. You know, the Boxing Academy existed as before the free school existed, and it was used by the council before that. But the free schools program enabled that to actually set up as an educational institution, so that those children not only got the benefits of the structure of boxing and what that brought, but then it also was able to get the, you know, academic qualifications and pathways help to provide it. So yeah, clearly really, really important. Is there any other questions from the audience?
Pete Whitehead, Education Advisor to the Children's Commissioner. We published a variety of reports into alternative provision, both registered and unregistered. I'd be really interested in the panel's thoughts on how the existing sector should interact with the unregistered AP sector, which is where the majority of children in AP are. And given that it is a hugely fragmented sector, how best practice can meaningfully be shared across the registered AP sector, because even within that, it's still incredibly fragmented with not huge numbers of groups in the way that you'd see with maths in the mainstream sector, for instance.
Just to bring in one of the New School Network's report recommendations on this was the idea that actually a local council could only dispel their Section 19 duty to place a child in education into a state-funded school. And then that state-funded school, if they would like to use unregistered provisions, they would like to use provision themselves, that's fine. But we A, know where that child is, which seems to be a huge problem within the data. B, that school is the one that are responsible for their safeguarding and ensuring that any provision that is being used is of a high quality. And C, that they were going to be responsible for their outcomes and their data, so that you can't just say, hello, we're technically at a school, but you can deal with the education bit, which I think sometimes does get slightly lost in the unregistered AP space. But that's what the New Schools Network thinks. What do the panel think?
Well, I first want to answer the question about sport.
Sorry.
I think sport is hugely important in schools. My wife taught in an inner city comprehensive, and Tony Bellew, the boxer, was there at the school, a pupil at the school, and his passion for boxing was encouraged by the sports teacher. But it's not just about sport, is it? I mean, other cultural activities are just as important, whether it be dance, whether it be drama, etc., etc. And for all the wrong reasons, they have been marginalised over the last 10 years. One of the good things, I think, that the Blair government did was to say that every primary school, for example, should have an hour of sport, 2 hours of sport, is it right, every week. And I remember as a head teacher doing that, and the results in terms of the children's desire to learn were stunning. To answer the question, I think, first of all, don't we need to know what we've all been saying, that we need to understand the unregistered sector. We need to know, because there's a lot of good in the unregistered sector, and we seem to forget that. And I've been at fault, sort of almost damning all unregistered schools, when I know there are some real gems there. So we need to understand them, and we need to sort of, as I think I said, we need to bring them into the fold. And yes, I do like the notion of sharing good practice. I mean, it's something that the school sector do, whether it be, secondary or primary, they share good practice with each other, and that's a hallmark of a good school.
Laura, how do you think that unregistered provision should be, dealt with?
So I think firstly, the Children's Commissioner has done some brilliant work shining a light in this space. I think that in terms of spreading good practice in schools, I mean, this is the age-old problem with our education system, right? It's not just AP that struggle with this. But I actually think we've seen with the hub model recently in mainstream education that actually that is working relatively well. And I do wonder whether that is something that we can spread to AP. Because, I mean, as Dennis has pointed out, there is so much data here. There's so much more to do, but there is a lot of data on good practice and what is effective. And it's just getting that round. And also the immortal problem, which is the good schools obviously will seek out, the learnings, the good practice, the data, and then the bad ones won't. So it's kind of making sure that we are inspecting on good practice, making sure everyone's registered, and making it easy for that good practice to be spread. And I think the hub model is a good way of doing that.
Excellent. Nick, do you use unregistered provision in your setting, and how did you kind of come to that decision, given how prevalent it is across the rest of the sector?
So I suppose my complete belief in AP, to sum it up, is we're adults and are responsible for all. We can change anything. The child can't, and so in education, we ask children to come to what we believe should be there, rather than actually changing to meet the child's needs, which always seems really peculiar to me. So within AP, that's the basis. In order to do that really effectively, I keep as much in-house as possible, because I can make sure there is really high quality that goes in there. So that's fundamentally why we don't. However, I think there is 2 types of unregistered provision. Some that are not registered because they don't want to be inspected and are not very good, and others that run a small equestrian farm, do something very, very bespoke, but don't have shower facilities, so therefore can't pass the independent school regs and therefore won't become registered. With the former, we need to get rid of, because no child should be in those type of things, and I think it is criminal to put children personally in that setting. The latter, however, it should, as NSN have recommended, be corroborated through. You can do it through your AP networks. I don't think there is a good AP provider that operates in any local authority that we work in that I'm not aware of. And quite regularly, they will work with us to do external moderation of exams, to make sure that they're up to speed with the latest things. But they cannot become registered because they run an automated garage, for example, and they are doing bespoke things on one afternoon a week. So we don't want to lose that real nuance of support, but it should be pulled through a regulating body, rather than just left to, because they're not at a full 25 hours, they're only at 23. It doesn't have to be registered, and yet
So remember, it's local authorities who are putting these children into unregistered provision. Shouldn't we examine that very carefully?
Yeah, and that goes back down to areas and inspection, and actually, you know, what are these children getting? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, you know, you come to Westminster, you have these conversations about policy. The question is, should children go to schools? That's what we're talking about. Of course, they should be in a school.
Yeah.
We can talk about, you know, how the system is fragmented and how it's emerged. Should all children, particularly those who are most vulnerable, attend a school that is well-resourced, well-inspected? Of course, yes.
A wonderful point to end on. I mean, there's a sentence in our report which I remember when I was sending it round for comments, someone highlighted and said this is a really good one, which is actually AP free schools are the only AP which has the word school in its name. And, you know, there was something about actually your last point there, Dennis, about, you know, what do we want these children to learn? How do we bring that into the setting and then get these children to attend that setting, which other schools do. And, you know, I think we've seen some really fantastic examples across the AP sector of how it can be done well. I think what this discussion has kind of kicked up is perhaps the way that the white paper is going about things might not actually be trying to trade on the best that exists within the sector, to learn from it, to grow it, and instead is perhaps focusing a bit so much on mainstream that actually some of these more vulnerable pupils might pay the cost of that. And I think everybody in this room is going to work hard to ensure that is not the case, because ultimately these children are, as we've all said, the most vulnerable in society and need the most support. I'd like to thank you all for coming today. I'd like to thank the panel for, I thought, a really, really interesting discussion. I'd like to thank the CSJ for hosting us today, for all the work that they have done previously on alternative provision, and making sure that kind of the voice of the most vulnerable is heard. And, you know, one of the things that NSN seeks to do is support the education of the most disadvantaged pupil, and free schools are a how. They're not just a what or a why. Free schools are the way that we can bring new ideas into the sector. But if there are going to be no free schools, you can be damn sure NSN's not giving up to try and find different ways to bring good ideas, because it's here for the children, and we need to make sure that we're continuing to reflect and grow so that we can serve their needs. If you could join me in thanking our panel with a round of applause, that'd be great.